Thank you very much. Lungfish are important. They're very important. The reason they're very important is because they are the extant sister group to Tetrapoda, that's you and I. Today there are two orders of lungfish that exist, the lepidosireniforms and the ceratodontiforms, and between these two orders there are three genera and 6 species. Now, the lungfish fossil record goes back to the Devonian. It's a very, very good fossil record. However, unfortunately, in the Devonian at least, it was riddled with polytomy. It's poorly resolved. The relationship of dipnoan lungfish with Tetrapoda has been realised by molecular means, but also, more interestingly, by features of the brains in extant taxa. So soft features in the brains of these groups here have produced this phylogeny here, which is accepted these days. Now, this sort of brings us to a question, an interesting question. Would this still apply in the fossil record, in the Devonian? We should certainly hope so. However, back in 1963, Eric Stentio said this. He worked on lungfish, and he worked on lungfish brains. However, I should point out, when this statement was made, there was only one lungfish endocast. That is, the infilling of the cranial cavity, which approximates the brain shape. He said that the dipnoan brain was typically developed as early as the beginning of the Devonian, and has not undergone any essential changes since this time. And I think you'll get the impression I'm going to tell you today that, even though I respect Eric Stentio's work very much, this is not the case anymore. So how do we go about testing this? Well, one way, or the way I've done it, is to take three lungfish from, say, the Upper Devonian. By this time, the Upper Devonian fish should have the same type of brain, according to Eric Stentio, as the lower Devonian fish. So I've taken 3 lungfish that are of a long snouted form. These are not a monophyletic group. They do not form one nice single clade. They're scattered across the Devonian lungfish phylogeny. We have this Gryphonapis whitey from Gogo in Australia, Upper Devonian, Rhinodipterus kimberliensis, again from Gogo, and Olivictis limnatis, which I'm going to describe today, from the Upper Devonian of Russia. So let's have a look what endocasts we currently have of lungfish. It's basically these two digital endocasts, I should say, and there are some digital interpretations. So to orientate yourself on these diagrams, there's some eyes. So the nose is out towards the front, and then the neck down there. What you're drawn to immediately are these large labyrinth systems. Now these are the inner ears inside our head. And we look at the characters that have so far been realised in an endocranium, endocast rather. In these dipnoi, we have things such as a notched saccular lagina, a pouch down there, and an enlarged utricular recess, and a ventrally expanded forebrain. So these are some of the characters which, they're not important really for this talk, but this one up here is the olfactory bulbs. These structures on the end here have been interpreted as olfactory bulbs. But could these not be olfactory bulbs as well? For a start, they are more bulbous. Now, a little bit of background. Olfactory bulbs are present, obviously, in extant lungfish, and there are 2 basic morphotypes of olfactory bulbs, 2 ways of arranging your bulbs inside your brain. Here we have Neoceratodus forsteri, which is the most primitive of the extant lungfish. And here we have one of the more derived lepidosirenids. In the primitive form, we have the blue olfactory bulbs here, attached to the forebrain on some stalks. These are called olfactory canals. And the olfactory bulbs are attached to the nasal capsules, or nostrils, well, for instance, by olfactory tracts. So this situation in the primitive form is known as pedunculated olfactory bulbs. This, in the lepidosirenid, are sessile olfactory bulbs. They rest within the forebrain. Now, so olfactory bulbs, as Glenn Northcutt in 1987 stated, that olfactory bulbs are pedunculated, and this is the primitive condition for lungfishes, because this is observed in the primitive lungfish and also in Latimeria, the sister group to the lungfish itself. Furthermore, This is undoubtedly correct, because all of the go-go lungfishes are pedunculated. They have these pedunculate olfactory bulbs. But how did they infer these pedunculated olfactory bulbs without such good pieces of technology as CT scanning? Well, they inferred it from correlating expanded snouts, which contained a large number of tubuli around the olfactory bulbs. Now this is a bit strange because this sounds very much like the state we have here. This is actually a mid-Devonian lungfish. Here are some rostral tubuli in an expanded snout, and these rostral tubuli are surrounding these not olfactory bulbs, but nasal capsules. The olfactory bulbs are, like in the modern lepidosirenids, sessile, attached to the forebrain, and they're connected to the nasal capsules by these long stalks. So I think in the fossil record up to now, olfactory bulbs have been misinterpreted as being pedunculate. So what do pedunculate olfactory bulbs look like in a fossil endocast? Well, Olovictus limnatus from Russia comes to the rescue because this is the first unequivocal pedunculated olfactory bulb lungfish in the fossil record. And some of the things we can see here are an exquisitely preserved hypophyseal recess area with some fantastic vasculature, probably the best preserved hypophyseal recess in a fossil lungfish ever. But more importantly for this talk, we have olfactory bulbs that lie separate to the forebrain. This is the forebrain here. There's a notch taken out there because the scan was done in 3 sections, not overlapping, unfortunately. But these olfactory bulbs are joined by an olfactory canal. So this endocast here, has some of these features we've already recognised in Rhinodipterus kimberliensis, this upper Devonian lungfish from Gogo, described just last month by Alice Clement and Per Alberg. It shares this enlarged utricular recess, it shares this ventrally expanded forebrain, but it definitely has pedunculated olfactory bulbs. So I interpret those olfactory bulbs that are pedunculated in Rhinodipterus not to be pedunculated. Here's another example here. This is another long-nosed lungfish, Gryphonathus whitey. I should point out this is not the entire endocast. This is just the forebrain going to the nasal capsules here. And if we were to look at this in a bit of detail, this is just to show you where it sits in the brain. We'd expect more endocast at the back there. We have still this ventrally expanded telencephalon. We have long olfactory tracts that connect sessile olfactory bulbs, represented by this bloating on the forebrain, connect them to these elongated nasal capsules. So how do these fit in? How do these endocasts, these different brain shapes, fit in with the actual skull itself? Well, this diagram here is I've made the dermal skeleton semi-transparent, and I've highlighted what we call the E bone and this D bone. The terminology for dipno is slightly different to tetrapods and more derived fish. As a landmark, I've used the bifurcation of the olfactory tracts, and you can see in Olovictus limnatus, this bifurcation occurs right at the front of the E-bone, whereas in Gryphonathus, it occurs behind the D-bone. Now, I can accept that the E-bone in Olovictus might just be a fused E and D bone, but still, bifurcation occurs right at the front, beneath the E-bone. Take off the skull roof itself, and what do we see inside? The neurocranium. Okay, let's use another landmark. This here, this is the profundus nerve, the medial profundus nerve. Using the same landmark in the endocast, the bifurcation occurs posterior to the foramen for the profundus nerve in Gryphonathus, and it occurs anterior to the profundus in Olovictus. Basically, what we have here is decoupling of the actual endocast, the cranial cavity, and the neurocranium and the dermal skeleton, not evolving in tandem, even though they all have the same morphotype. So this basically is my conclusion slide. What we have here is in the mid-Devonian, we have the sessile brain olfactory bulb form. So whereas pedunculate olfactory bulbs were considered to be the primitive state, I now consider them to be a more derived state. They come after the sessile form. Fair enough, Latimeria also has pedunculate olfactory bulbs, and that is more primitive than the lungfish, but going back even further, the hagfish have sessile olfactory bulbs. So it's a derived state, and we can see here it occurs more than once. It seems to be a convergent character, but I should point out these are brains, these are endocasts. And on here it just states that what we might be having is either these pedunculate olfactory bulbs are going to have to evolve once and then disappeared, or they're going to have to evolve more than once. Basically, it's a convergent character. And that's where I'll leave us today.